Hello there, my name is Eric Martin, an interpretive park ranger with the National Park Service, and I'm here at Ford's Theater National Historic Site, and I'm on the balcony level of the theater, and it is here is where President Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary Lincoln and two invited guests were here on the night of April 14th, 1865, seated over in that flag-draped presidential theater box that you can see there, watching the play Our American Cousin. And it was there that President Lincoln was shot from behind by John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was a very famous Shakespearean actor who had a vehement hatred of Lincoln in the North and essentially blamed Lincoln and President Lincoln for all the death and destruction that had been inflicted upon the country as a result of the war, and believed that he would be doing the South a favor by ridding Lincoln and giving the South one more last chance for its independence as an independent country of the Confederacy. And John Wilkes Booth thought of himself very much as an American Brutus. If you go back in ancient Roman history, the ancient Roman Republic, the ancient Roman Brutus who slays Julius Caesar for his usurpation of power. Well, John Wilkes Booth sees himself very much in that role, particularly in relation to his role as a Shakespearean actor as the American Brutus who slays the American Caesar, Abraham Lincoln, for his likewise usurpation of power. Now, if we look right here at this spiral staircase, this is exactly where John Wilkes Booth would have come up on that night at around 10 a.m. It was about 3/4 of the way through the play, Our American Cousin, during Act 3, Scene 2. John Wilkes Booth, once he came up on the stairs onto the balcony here, casually made his way this way behind the seating area of the theater. Very visible. Many in the audience, in fact, that night saw John Wilkes Booth enter. And in fact, many in the audience here, as they saw John Wilkes Booth casually make his approach towards the flag-draped theater box there, they thought that President Lincoln had sent a messenger, had summoned Booth here to the theater, perhaps wanting to say hello to him. John Wilkes Booth was known by President Lincoln as an actor, and in fact, he had seen him perform in a play here called The Marble Heart in November of 1863. Well, John Wilkes Booth made his way right along here as we proceed towards this outer yellow door. And just as he approached this outer yellow door, there was a messenger seated here right next to the door named Charles Forbes, who had taken the place of the guard John Parker, who originally escorted President and Mrs. Lincoln and their guests to the theater box. John Wilkes Booth reached into his pocket, simply presented a calling card of some sort to the messenger. Words were exchanged between the two, and John Wilkes Booth was admitted in. And there were no locks on any of the doors. Once John Wilkes Booth went through this door here, he then quickly closed this yellow door behind him and then quickly grabbed a music stand bar that he had earlier hidden behind this door, and he'll throw it up between and wedge it between the door and the wall here, effectively barricading this outer yellow door so that nobody could follow behind him. If you notice here, there's two theater box doors. This is marked box 7. This is marked box 8. John Wilkes Booth would have walked through one of these two doors. I believe that John Wilkes Booth would have walked through the door marked box 8 based on the angle in which President Lincoln is shot. It is around 12 p.m. There is only one actor on the stage at that point, Harry Hawk, playing the American Cousin. He is about to utter the funniest line of the entire play. John Wilkes Booth knew this all along. The line that Hawk uttered went like this, quote, "Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you sock-dologizing old man-trap," unquote. And with that, there is a roar of laughter in the theater. And with that laughter, John Wilkes Booth steps in. Again, one of these two doors, pulls out a single-shot .44 Derringer pistol, aims it at the back of Lincoln's head just a few inches away, and at trajectory angle fires the weapon. The bullet enters just above Lincoln's left ear. Lincoln is seated right here on this walnut rocking chair. Bullet enters at a trajectory angle through the brain, lodging up behind the right eye. and Lincoln slumps immediately unconscious in the rocker. Seated in this black cane chair here was Mary Lincoln. Seated on this love sofa was Major Rathbone, and seated right over there was Clara Harris. Once the shot is fired, as gun smoke slowly ascends up and out of the theater box, Major Rathbone, seated there, hearing a muffled sound with the laughter, turns. As he sees the gun smoke slowly clear and he sees Booth standing behind the rocker here, he attempts to grab Booth, who drops the derringer into the floor of the theater box, pulls out a knife. Rathbone thereupon raises his left arm in order to shield himself. Booth takes the weapon and inflicts a stab wound in Rathbone's left arm down to the bone. Rathbone reels back. Booth then bolts over the balustrade there where the flag is draped. And as Booth leaps over, it's believed he catches his spur in that center U.S. Treasury Regimental Guards flag, crashing onto the stage below there, approximately about 12 feet. Once Booth landed on the stage, he brandishes the bloodied knife in which he has just stabbed Major Rathbone and utters the words, "Sic semper tyrannis," that's the Latin, thus ever to tyrants, and then at a quick pace makes his way across the stage, which we'll go down to shortly before. It was soon. When people see John Wilkes Booth on the stage, they think it's part of the play, it's part of the act. They have no idea what has happened. It's not until a few seconds after Booth's disappearance and Major Rathbone cries out from the theater box here, "Stop that man! Somebody stop that man!" And then there's stunned silence in the theater, and then slowly total pandemonium and chaos will start to ensue throughout. Several men, they rush towards this outer yellow door. They pound on the door, they try to get in. Rathbone, bleeding profusely in the theater box here, is able to make his way towards this outer yellow door. Removes the wood bar that was placed, wedged there by Booth. The first doctor in the theater who initially entered into the theater box here is a Dr. Charles Leal. And Dr. Leal's seen all this blood on the floor from Rathbone. Initially, as he sees the unconscious president slumped in the rocker there, believes it is President Lincoln's blood. He proceeds to lay the unconscious Lincoln down on the floor of the theater box. Here, frantically looking for a stab wound, can't find anything. Notices Lincoln's eyes are closed, so he checks his head. And as he runs his hand through the back of Lincoln's hair, and the backside of his head, finds the bullet wound. As he examines the point of entry, instantly knows that the wound is mortal. It is impossible for him to recover, he informs the now emotional, hysterical Mary Lincoln. Now the only thought now that comes to Dr. Leal is getting President Lincoln to a bed, the closest bed that can be found. There is no other place to carry President Lincoln but to the closest bed. Otherwise, he will die here in the theater. So the decision will be made after about several minutes of chaos here in this theater box by Dr. Leal and a surgeon, Charles Sabin Taft, who also comes to assist, to have the unconscious president lifted, carried out. Several men, Dr. Leal leading the way, will carry the unconscious president out through this hallway. And as they carry the unconscious president, Union soldiers stationed who were in the theater are clearing a pathway for the men as they make their way behind the seating area. And back towards the spiral staircase will carry President Lincoln. And as they proceed down to the lobby here, Dr. Leal, they go right through these doors here. They would have exited out. As they look out across the street, Dr. Leal sees some row boarding houses, pondering if there's a spare bed perhaps in one of these homes. And as there's looking a border across the street in the Peterson house, a house owned by William and Anna Peterson, hearing all this commotion, opens the front door of the house, holds out a candle to investigate, and as he sees the men holding the unconscious president, looking for some place to carry him, spontaneously cries out to them, "Bring him in here, bring him in here." And there the president will be carried subsequently across the street, and history will be made in the Peterson House there. Okay, and as I mentioned, when John Wilkes Booth jumped from the theater box onto the stage there, falling off balance somewhat, possibly breaking his left leg, and then slowly as he rose up and yelled out the word "Sic Semper Tyrannis," then made his escape diagonally across the stage here in this direction. John Wilkes Booth flees behind the stage set. And as John Wilkes Booth made his escape, he runs into William Withers, the orchestra director, in which he takes the same dagger in which he stabbed Major Rathbone and stabs at his clothing, tearing it to shreds part of his outer attire. And then Booth would have exited through this door right here. And as we look out here, this is an alley, and this in 1865 was known as Baptist Alley. So it was right here that John Wilkes Booth had a horse waiting for him, and when he stepped out to the alley, there was a African American named Peanuts who was holding the horse. John Wilkes Booth quickly just knocks Peanuts to the ground, grabs his horse, and makes his escape on the horse in this direction, right out here, and then to the left, right up. The alley continues right up to F Street and then is on the run for the next 12 days. As you take notice of the front of the presidential theater box, you'll notice there is a print of George Washington, and that print is identical to the original which we have in storage. The original rocking chair in which President Lincoln was seated in, that's in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. And the other items that you see in the theater box are identical to the original. The reason you see a print of George Washington is that is how the Ford brothers, they would have designated the box for President Lincoln to let everybody know that that was where it was reserved for Mr. Lincoln that night when everyone knew that he would be coming to the theater. So in a very important, significant sense, President Abraham Lincoln's assassination is itself very Shakespearean in that at the height of his success in preserving the union of the states and abolishing the institution of slavery, he's taken away from the American people and loses his life. And there's also something else that's rather ironic in that it's here at the theater that President Lincoln came to relax. This was his forum in which to get away from the many stresses and the strains that he had when carrying the country through 4 years of horrific war. And it's rather ironic that it was here at the theater of all places in which he came to relax that he would meet his demise and his end. And finally, his assassination on Good Friday of all days has worked to propel his assassination into martyrdom, made him a martyr amongst certainly historians who have studied all about President Lincoln and his legacy, and certainly made his legacy very much analogous to martyrdom. Thank you.